Welcome everyone tonight to Stingray's monthly webinar, and we are with Tom Ball tonight for a day in the life. He's going to take us through a day in the life of a professional photographer who has a variety of interests and subject matter and all of the different ways he uses filters in those different areas. By way of introduction, Tom is like I said, editorial and commercial photographer. He's an author and an instructor. He specializes in adventure sports, portraits, and travel photography. His work has been featured in numerous publications, including Outdoor Photographer, Digital Photo Pro, Lightroom magazines. He is a Kelby One instructor, a Nikon speaker, and a SanDisk Extreme Team member. He's been called one of America's top visionaries by National Geographic and one of the best photo workshop leaders in the country by Photo District News. And Tom, it looks like we have some folks on the line who have attended your workshops before, so say hi to those
Yes,
guys.
good. That's always good.
So you can take it from here, and I'll let you know if anyone comes up with questions along the way.
Okay, terrific. I'm super excited. Thanks for having me. I hope, I know we're all home maybe a little bit more than we normally are now, so webinars and online Zoom presentations, terrific. We've been doing a lot of that here as well. We're not obviously traveling as much. So I was really excited tonight just to talk about a variety of genres, different subject matters, and kind of how that forms who I am as a photographer. But really, I am heavy onto the end of education and like, boy, learn from my mistakes. Like, try this, don't do this. And part of that is working with Stingray and using Stingray filters for in my entire career. I've been doing this a long time, and I can't even imagine doing a lot of what I do without those, and you're going to see examples of that. So I thought tonight would be fun because I'll start with some landscape work, but it's going to really cross over into some different areas, and I'm hoping that I can show you guys or bring up some ideas that maybe you hadn't thought of before. And things are changing right now so much with digital capture. The sensors are different, the way that we see and do things are different, and camera technology is better. It's allowing us to do things that we couldn't even do like a couple years ago. So it's very exciting. I get all worked up when I even start talking about this. So you can see a list of things that we'll go through tonight, and I'll just hit the button and we'll start rolling right here. Originally, we were going to go to the Badlands earlier this year, but that was right when things were really bad, and so we didn't go. But we originally had thought maybe we'd do maybe a presentation just revolving around that one national park. But I'm going to start with that, and you can see this image here, and I would just want to talk a little bit about filter use and exposure and maybe some theory there. So we all know that capturing in the digital world is a little different than film. We're always kind of exposing for the highlights. We want to capture the highlights. That's where a lot of that digital information is, and let the shadows maybe fall where they fall. But if you think about that, when you get these high contrast landscapes or travel images or whatever the case may be, you may have to make choices and sacrifices. If I'm going to hold the highlights down, I'm going to lose some of the shadows. So on this image, you can see here, this is just really the classic way that I use a grad ND all the time in the field. Now I realize that we work in post, we do stuff in Lightroom and Photoshop, but what you're going to find is while they have filters similar to this, it's different in terms of trying to get the best photo in the field, capturing more information, because you can actually compress. You can bring the highlights down, which is going to allow you to capture more of the shadows. So this is a classic scenario here where you have this long landscape, and so often as a landscape photographer, we work early in the morning or late in the evening, so we may have a shadowed foreground and an amazing sunrise or sunset. So on an image like this, my mode of operation is I'm almost always using a 2 or a 3 stop soft edge It's the Galen Raw Graduate ND filters that Stingray has. I've used those forever.
And those are square. They're flat and square, so they don't screw onto the lens, correct?
Yeah, they are. And so you kind of have two choices with those filters. You can buy an adapter, which will allow you to slide it in and maybe have a little more control and free up a hand. Or I often will actually just grab them and hand hold them really quickly in front of the lens if I'm moving fast, or I just don't have my adapter that I can screw onto the front of the lens and slide that down. But anyway, that's you know, that is like the meat and potato filter in my pack is that one. It's like I have the 2 and 3 stop everywhere I go. I use them constantly.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay, so we'll move forward. We'll just keep going. So tying that in a little bit too, just to some other concepts here. One thing that we're always talking about in landscape photography is what I call perspective with purpose. And I think a lot of us just see a scene and we're attracted to it, but maybe we're not really dialed into why we like the shot. Is it, you know, what part of it is really making it interesting? And when I identify what that is, then I need to figure out what I can do at the camera to make it better. And so often it may be, for instance, in this image, you have this amazing baked out texture in the Badlands. And that is so iconic for that part of the world. So if you want to make it a real statement, you're going to get close to it. And then you add a super wide angle, which is going to stretch and even distort it a little bit because you have a wide angle lens and you're really close to it. It really lays the groundwork for a strong shot. So another lens that you'll see throughout this presentation tonight is a color polarizer. It's the LB color combo. That polarizer just has this beautiful blend of polarizing, adding contrast, warming, punching colors. It's kind of like it just does it all. That's another one that I can't get enough of it. I use it all the time. One other thing too that I would just point out for the landscape shooters in the crowd there, it's very important when you're thinking foreground, middle ground, background, your position vertically, whether it's a foot off the ground or 3 feet off the ground, it really stretches or compresses the middle ground. So one thing that we're always talking about in the field if we're on a seminar or workshop is letting the middle ground breathe. Like, what are you trying to do with that middle ground? Are you trying to minimize it? Or maybe you're trying to make it a little bit bigger. So I always keep that in the back of my head when I'm composing a shot like this.
And when you're using a circular filter like the lighter, brighter color polarizer, do you use step-up rings and get a larger size than your lens to avoid vignetting?
Yeah, no, but only because I have it matched out. If you're using a super wide, yes, you can get some vignetting with it, but I rarely am at that level. It makes a lot of sense. I understand why people go bigger on the front end so that they don't get any vignetting, but I generally don't run into that. This one lens I'm using here, this 14 to 30, definitely can see a lot when you go back to 14 on it, but for the most part, I just pair it with whatever the diameter size is on the front of the glass. And I rarely have to worry about that. The time that I run into that situation is if I have a polarizer on the front of my lens and then I screw on the adapter to hold the grad ND filter, that's really pushing out this square holder, which you're going to start to see that earlier than you want to. So you may just have to hand hold or come up with a different setup for that.
Right. Well, and the step-up rings are a really good way to save money. If you want to get a filter that's going to fit multiple lenses, you could use the step-up rings and buy the larger filter and not have to buy 2.
Yeah, you know what? We are in a crazy time right now because there are so many new lenses and even mirrorless compared to DSLR. I mean, everyone is evolving in their cameras right now, and the idea of step-up rings makes more sense than ever because inevitably you'll get the new mirrorless camera or the new lens that fits the new camera, and it's a different diameter, and so
you don't want to replace your whole bag. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, very good. That's a good question, guys.
All right. One other thing I just thought I would throw out to everybody in the audience, and just food for thought, is think of why you go to an area. We see this all the time, like, oh, we're going to go to Aspen and the Maroon Bells. That's where this shot is. They say it's one of the most photographed mountains in the world. I don't know about that, but it probably is certainly the most photographed mountain in Colorado. And a lot of folks are like, well, I don't want to go there because, everyone shot that. All true, but I kind of take a different view of that. Um, I like the iconic landmarks. I'm gonna go to where the Grand Canyon Mather Point is in these places. And sure, we all want to get something new and maybe different, but I also, I'm more open to the idea of like, it's inspiring and there's a reason it's iconic. And so then you're left with that question of, well, how can I do this a little different than everybody else? And, what are the tools available? And sometimes it's very limiting. If you're behind a railing or you have X place you can go to, you're there. You're kind of like, all right, I'm waiting on better conditions. In this case, maybe with the fall colors. A lot of times it relates to weather. I think a lot of getting that the shot that hasn't been done 100 times at an iconic spot, it's just a matter of paying your dues, going over and over and hoping for that one moment where you get that shot. But I think that rather than turn off a location and say, I'm not going to go there because it's been done, I think maybe what I like to think of anyway in my work is like, oh no, I'm definitely going to go there. I mean, that's a beautiful spot. And maybe we do see the same thing that everyone else does, but I just love that idea of that, but maybe we don't. Maybe there is something different there or the weather comes in. So just something to think about with that. It's I could tell you a backstory on this, but we literally arrived at almost like, I'm going to say 5:30 in the morning, and there's 300 people already there at the side of this lake. So I was like, whoa. But anyway, I'm very open with where I go, what I see, and I'm, sure I see what other folks have done, but I also feel like you got to go pay your dues and see if you can come up with something new, or maybe you're just going to get lucky with weather or something along those lines. Okay, so let's keep rolling here. This one I think is really, really important. And we see this on our workshops all the time. And I just wanted to throw this one out to everybody. There's this idea of what you see is what you get in photography. And for most of the daytime, that's exactly right. But it's different when you're on the edge, the sunrise, sunset, or even more twilight, civil twilight times, and at night. And the best example I have for this concept of cumulative light is we are always up in Alaska every year shooting northern lights. And you may see just a tiny little green spot in the sky up there, but after 30 seconds, it looks incredible. So it's that light that's building. Our eyes kind of see in real time, but the camera gives us this ability to put 30 seconds into a slice of time. You can build it into this whole single frame. So what happens is what we see is folks are walking back to the car when they should be heading back to the beach. And this is a great example of this. This is at Bandon Beach, an amazing place in Oregon, very popular and just gorgeous. You can't do a wrong shot there. But this was at civil twilight. So sun had set, we're facing west. I'm using a 5-stop more slow. So we're talking a different type of filter here, one that is basically just blocking light. ND filters just eliminate light, which allows you to use a slower shutter speed, or perhaps you're trying to use a different aperture so you don't have to go to f/16 to slow things down. You can be in the middle apertures and it's a better lens quality. But if I showed you this picture, what you were seeing as you were putting your tripod up here, it did not look like this at all. There was just a very faint glow, but after a long exposure, 100 seconds, so almost a couple minutes here, it looks a whole lot different and it just renders beautifully. So that's a piece of advice I would throw out to everyone is remember when you're on these edgy times of light, really twilight times and even at night, that it's harder perhaps to envision what you're going to record in the camera until you actually do it, because the way it collects and builds light on the final frame is not necessarily what you're seeing right at that moment. Okay, so let's see what else we have in here. All right, for all the techies out there, this is great. You guys got to try this. I'm so excited about this stuff. Um, I'm a Nikon person, but I think most cameras have multiple exposure capabilities now. And for the longest time, multiple exposure it was kind of almost a gimmick. It's like, oh, why do I want to do multiple exposure? I don't get it, or why would I do it? There might be a few kind of creative, fine art, abstract kind of ideas, but not anymore. And here's why. The cameras nowadays, DSLRs, at least in the Nikon lineup, it's going to make it really easy to set the number of frames. You can even change how the frames are blended together, whether it's biased towards highlights, shadows, or just averaged out. And you can even take time between the individual frames. So there's all these levels of control. And how I'm applying that in my work, this shot is just a great example of that. My wife and I were photographing out in Western Colorado last year. This is near Ouray. And it was, the fall color looks terrific, great. But we show up at this lake and everyone's headed out because it's nasty. The weather is it's like Patagonia weather. The wind is ripping, blowing. I mean, the water on this lake, even though it doesn't appear in the photo this way, I mean, it's lapping like waves on the shore, splashing everybody that's staying there. And so the only thing I could think about with this was there had these amazing cumulus clouds, but they just weren't stretching. If you could shot them at 1/8 of a second or 100th of a second or anything fast, and they just were frozen there. But then I thought, okay, I have all these ND filters that I use. The 5-stop is one of my favorites. That is going to help stretch the clouds a little bit. But what happens if I do a 3-frame multiple exposure, each one a minute long, because the 5-stop ND is allowing me to do this long exposure, and then the camera is going to blend the 3 1-minute exposures into the final frame. And this is what it came out to. It just stretched the clouds through the entire shot. And it's very exciting for me. This is a work in progress. I'm still coming to grips with where I can use multiple exposures. I'm doing a lot of this with
like a lot of fun. You're, in the end, getting a super long exposure.
Yeah, it's and then the other part to this, which has been newer to me. I've been shooting mirrorless now for about a year when Nikon came out with their cameras. And if you're a mirrorless shooter, it'll show you the previous frame as you're going through a multiple frame series. So if you're trying to line something up in a shot, maybe you're putting a portrait on a flag or something like that, you're seeing a 50% opacity shot of the first shot, which allows you to line up and click the photo on the second. But I would encourage everybody in the audience, if you haven't tried multiple exposures, maybe revisit it. You might be shocked at what it allows you to do. And when you start adding filters into this mix, it really opens up a whole new window of like, look at what I can do and imagine streams or anything that moves, clouds. It's very exciting. I'm excited to do more with this.
So what time of day did you take that?
Classic. This is probably like 11, almost high noon, which is like, that's the time supposedly we're all supposed to be eating pancakes and, drinking coffee. It's like, oh, it's the light's done. But another thing that I certainly, you'll hear as a common thread, especially if you are shooting editorially or commercially, you're always figuring out what works well with the light that you're giving. You don't have choices as much. You can get up early, but then you have a deadline. And so if it's in the middle of the day, you're going to keep shooting. If you have, X amount of images you have to produce by Friday, you have less flexibility just to wait around. And so you get more creative with the light you're given. And this is an example of this. I mean, this really it's kind of the time to be going back and taking a breather at the hotel. But instead, the lake, which was these huge waves, completely glossed over, so it kind of has this sheen on it. You don't even know it's giant whitecaps out there because of these long exposures sandwiched on top of one another. Anyway, just wanted to throw out there. It's fun stuff. I'm looking forward to doing more of this. Okay. Here's one I'll throw out too, and we've been doing a lot of online classes this summer, and this has come up a lot. Think about the concept rather than the subject. I do this all the time. and especially where you have time to slow down a little bit. And that first line there, we so often hear, you know, capture the shot and grab the photo and do this, and that's very true. I mean, that's what I do as an adventure sports shooter, and a kayaker is going off a waterfall or a skier off a jump. I'm capturing the shot. At least I hope I am. I'm doing my best to do that. But with landscapes where maybe you have a little more time to set up and anticipate the light, I think if I'm not capturing now, I'm really creating. I have a little more time to maybe put a filter on or change the perspective. And it's kind of my message to myself to slow down. And then the next level that I take that to is I'm trying to figure out what's the concept here. So this is an image down in Sedona. Oak Creek is so beautiful down there in Arizona, and the light is, it's hard to go wrong in the early morning and late evening. It just is absolutely gorgeous. And so this is Oak Creek. It comes through these little channels in the red rock, and the question comes up with this is the water, and how are you going to photograph the water to match the concept of this tranquil, very calming scene? And first, you're going to need a way to get there. So I'm using now this is a little different. You would think an ND filter, but I'm using a combination of filters that are slowing things down, along with F16 in this case, which is going to help, you know, slow everything down to what the right amount of shutter speed and the motion that I capture in the water. When I used to shoot water, you know, when I first got into slow-mo water, everything was 30 seconds. It was all kind of cotton. But then you realize you want a little texture in there, and maybe that's a better way to render it relative to this tranquil scene. Another thing that I would really point out here, and this is another great landscape combo of filters, is the light is sunset. So it's coming in perpendicular to my camera angle here. Perfect for a polarizer. We all remember, you know, polarizing light is you want to be perpendicular to the sun. So that's going to work on the formation in the background, but it's also going to be really bright because it's in the sun and the foreground's in the shade. So you can use a bracket that Stingray sells where they have a LB color polarizer that actually slots in the graduated ND filter holder so that it puts the two right up next to one another and allows you to rotate the filter and move the grad up and down. It's a very slick setup, and it works time and time again for a landscape like this. Okay, let's keep going here. The only trip that we've done in the last 5 months has been 2 days into the mountains, camping, of course, in Colorado. And we live here, so we at least have some areas that are pretty nice near our home. And one thing that I just wanted to point out here, and this ties back into technology and how cameras are changing and some other things, and the ability for us to put filters on lenses that previously we couldn't. So exciting. So I love my 14-24, my Nikon 14-24. The problem with that thing is it has this giant bulbous front. Well, they come out with a Z system. Nikon has their mirrorless Z camera, and they have a 14-30, which is super wide, but it has a flat front that takes filters. I mean, that was like a moment of like joy for me. I was like, let's celebrate, because now for these super grand landscapes, I have a filter and a holder I can actually screw into a lens now. And I'm not limited because the previous generation had a bulbous front. You couldn't put a filter on it, or an easy way to do it. It was way too involved with something as big as a dinner plate. So that's what I've been experimenting with a lot this summer. And another thing that I would throw in here, this is a Galen Rawle 3-stop soft edge graduate ND. I'm dropping the shadowy shaded part of that filter on the sky and the mountains in the background. That's going to help kind of bring down the highlights and give me a better exposure. Another filter that I've been using a lot this summer, and I'm really starting to like it, is the 4-stop version of that. Now that's a pretty strong filter, a 4-stop soft edge graduate ND. But what I like about that filter is with the soft edge, you could just kind of bring it in gradually and kind of just give you the right amount of shading depending on the scenes. There have been places in Colorado this summer where we've been shooting flowers like this, and it's been amazing the difference in exposure value between the shadowy foreground and the sunlit peaks. You normally think, oh, it's going to be about 2 stops or so. We've had a couple situations early in the morning where it was almost 4 stops. So it's been fun to try that stronger grad filter, the 4-stop version, and it's been key for a lot of these pictures. So we're going to roll a little ways away from landscapes now, and we're going to switch over towards adventure sports. This is one thing that I run into all the time, and I'm sure a lot of folks in the audience do, and it's a question that gets asked a lot. So I thought I would just try to shed my view on the whole idea here. When you have an image like this, where it's this absolute sunset of the century, you get lucky and you're there in the right place. The problem becomes how blown out the sky can be, and not just the sky, but in particular, the red channel. So on your playback, on your camera, you should be able to set it so you see all 3 channels, RGB, red, green, blue, rather than just the cumulative luminance histogram. And the reason being is that cumulative histogram may not show what's actually happening in terms of what's getting clipped, what's getting overexposed in the final shot. If you looked at the histogram for this image right now, the red channel would, well, if it didn't have a filter on, it's still going to be going towards the right. So what you would say to yourself is, okay, well then I need to underexpose the scene until I'm not clipping that red channel. Well, what happens then is to really recover the red channel highlights, all this green foreground and the camper and the truck, it's almost going to be dark. I mean, to really get this red sky to where you can hold to the highlights and the shadows, you have to use an ND filter. This is not one that you're going to really salvage any other way. And so it's just yet another reason that I'm bringing my grad NDs with me in the field. This photo doesn't do it justice. This is the filtered shot. Imagine this scene without that shaded grad part on top of the sky up here, and the contrast is just over the top, especially that red channel. So what I would tell folks is pay attention to that red channel, and if it's getting clipped, it's a highlight that's getting clipped. If you don't want muddy, blocked out colors in the final shot, and that you're not going to be able to retrieve, or to a very limited level, depending on where your exposure falls, put on that grad 3-stop ND and you'll save the day. The other part, the background to this shot though, is my wife and I both were outdoor guides for years and years and years. A lot of my work right out of journalism school was on expeditions and shooting for a lot of different outdoor magazines. And we still do that a lot today. And this is like a day in the life in the Bull household, where we're off somewhere. This is at a really popular climbing area in Idaho. And, you know, it's just in between shooting climbing all day. Oh, here's this, you know, a sunset. Better jog up the hill really quick and grab this before it goes away. So, so do you use filters in adventure sports? I mean, come on. Well, you know, one thing that one of the reasons I like adventure sports are they're outdoors. I mean, you know, that's definitely key to who I am as a photographer and what I like to do. And so there's always those landscape elements to it and what we do with filters and landscapes. Another angle on this is I shoot a lot of climbing. And oftentimes what a shot like this is you're on a rope, maybe the climber set up a line for you, or you're rappelling down a cliff, or any iteration thereof. And it is brutal on equipment. You have to be very careful when you're on a rope with the camera, because rule number 1 is you can never drop anything. There could be a ton of people at the bottom of the cliff, or worse yet, you're directly above a climber working with them, and you can't drop anything. That's all there is to it. But the flip side of this too is you're banging your camera constantly. And so this Hilux UV filter, it's a protective piece of glass that Stingray makes. We use this all the time in any number of scenarios, because quite frankly, I'm tired of sending my lenses to Nikon and having them replace the front element. I could show you in my office here, I probably have 4 lenses, 3 or 4 right now I can think of, that actually have a scratch on the front. And as much as we try lens hoods and all these things to prevent that, it it happens. And so if I know I'm going to be shooting something that's going to be rough on me and the camera, I'm going to put that protective filter on there. I can't tell you the number of times that has saved the day on a workshop where somebody's dropped a lens and hits the pavement, goes into a rock, whatever the case may be. The front filter is destroyed, but the lens itself is saved. So I'm a believer, and they are saving me money because I am tough on my equipment. I don't try to be. It's just the nature of the beast here when you're shooting stuff like this. Okay, let's see here. Same idea here. This is, you can go from rock climbing to mountaineering to ice climbing to all things climbing. This is up in Alaska. We used to live in Alaska. We lived there for 10 years, and I've been going up there the last 30 plus summers. We have a lot of assignment work that we do up there, as well as we have a ton of friends who are in the guiding business there, because that's where we used to guide. And so you see a photo like this and you're like, oh, that doesn't look safe. Well, you could probably say that's true, but the guy in the shot, and with a lot of adventure sports, photography, you're working with really great athletes, people that this is what they do. They're gonna do it whether you're gonna take a picture or not. And sometimes, you can set it up to where you're in the right place. And other times there's a lot of prior planning that goes onto it for some really special moment. It's some first ascent or somebody paddles off a waterfall, something like that. But there's always in the back of your head, you're working closely with the people you're photographing here, and safety is paramount. And you're just trusting the athlete that, yeah, I'm going to climb this thing. You can take a picture or not, but I'm going up. It's like, okay, I can, that works for me. But this fella is just, he's a friend. He's a really good climber. He owns a guiding service in Alaska. And he's just, he's like, sure, I'll do laps on this thing all day long. One thing I wanted to bring up with this picture is, remember with photography, we're not photographing the subject. We're photographing the light on the subject. And you'll probably hear a common thread on all photographers talking about light. And I remember it: direction, quality, and color, DQC. All light has direction. Quality, is it soft or hard edged? And color, is it warm? Am I gelling a flash? Anything along those lines. So keeping in tune with that is important. And sometimes you just get lucky. Here you can't control the light, and you get a beam of sun while a person happens to be climbing this glacier fin, and there's storm clouds, and it just comes together. So often it's luck, and you're just out there hoping for it, and more often than not, it doesn't work, and then occasionally it really does work. So anyway, live and breathe that Hilux. It's going to save the day.
So does the Hilux degrade the image at all?
No, that's a great point. I don't even talk about that. If you get a good one, like the Stingray version, you're fine. There are other lower quality glass filters out there that, yes, are definitely going to degrade the image. But I have shot for 25 years with something on the front of my glass on a lot of adventure sports. And as long as you're getting a top quality filter like the Hilux, you're not going to have to worry about it. Think of filters as an extension of your lens in terms of the glass quality. I've never understood this idea of buying a $2,000 lens and then putting a $5 filter on it. I mean, I guess, okay, it's economical, but you're just downplaying this beautiful piece of glass you just bought. So you want to match it with a filter that's of the same quality. So to answer that question, it doesn't affect lens quality whatsoever as long as you're getting a high quality filter on there. This was another adventure sports shoot for a magazine. This was super fun. These boats actually fold up into little suitcases. They weigh 50 pounds, barely legal in terms of size-wise to get on an airplane. And our assignment was it's kind of like a James Bond thing. You have these suitcases that have kayaks in there. And we flew down from Colorado down to the Virgin Islands, literally got to the beach, built these boats. They kind of pop out of the suitcase, takes a while to put them together, stowed that stuff in a locker, and just paddled off, just like that. So really cool. And it was a fun idea of just exploring the Virgin Islands, by kayak and seeing it maybe a way that most people don't. And it allows you to sneak into little coves and places that can be really hard to access from the land or from a bigger boat. On terms of filters, this trip wouldn't have happened without a polarizer, quite frankly. The water, if you've ever been to the Caribbean, and I'm sure many folks of you have out there, it's so incredibly turquoise, and you have a lot of sandy, shallow areas, and you get this beautiful color in the water, just these hues of turquoise as it drifts into the deep water. The polarizer is key for reducing that sheen on the water and bringing that color to life. I mean, I don't think I took my polarizer off this entire assignment. It just transformed the shots. And so everywhere we went, we were living and breathing that. You know, this ties back into that question of a protective filter. Salt water is not great on cameras. It's fresh water. You can sit out there in the rain all day long. Salt water, it's maybe a little more corrosive, and you probably are trying to wipe it down with fresh water if you really get wet. Same for that front element. Having anything on the front is not a bad idea, because it's going to prevent the inevitable saltwater splashes from coming up and getting into that lens. You can see as a sea kayaker, their paddles moving, you're in choppy water, you're a foot off the water, you're getting wet constantly. Even on a flat day, chances are you're getting drip and spray. So you need something on the front of your lens. For me, it was as polarizer. It absolutely was just so critical for this whole thing. You know, the other thing that I would just point out really quickly, you know, we always kind of go back and forth, well, you know, what can you do in the computer that's like this? And there you'll see actions that say polarizer, and it's true. They'll add a little, you know, saturation to the shot. But what a polarizer does in the field that no computer program will ever do is it will reveal, it takes off the glare on water and shows you things underneath that you would not see in a normal photograph. I should have showed us, I have a series in Alaska of a stream that is gray water, and then you use a polarizer, it takes the gray off, and it's loaded with red sockeye salmon. A polarizer will do that for you in the field. So it's
my brother-in-law actually wears a pair of polarized sunglasses. He's a fly fishing instructor, and so he uses polarized sunglasses for the same reason, to see through the water, to see if there are fish. And when he told me this, I immediately thought of the camera filters, and I thought, well, same concept.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. We all want those polarized glasses to you know, bonefish, right? He's probably out there catching a tarpon or some cool thing. Okay, let's see here. One other thing I just thought I'd bring up is, and this kind of ties back into this new lens that we've been playing with, this 14 to 30. Now that we have a super wide that we can put a polarizer on. You know, the one thing that you do have to be careful with polarizers are, if you are holding it in a standard landscape format, your camera, then the long axis is on that horizontal line. A 14 millimeter might see from the sun all the way to that polarizing perpendicular angle. So you're going to get uneven polarizing if you're in that format. But let's not forget, if you go vertical, even with a really wide angle lens, now the horizontal axis is the short axis on the camera. The long axis is in the vertical plane. So this ties right back into what you just were saying with fishing and kayaking and everything on water. Once again, this was last summer on an assignment in Alaska, and we're trying to kind of show the POV photography, point of view. So much of what we do on assignments outdoors now are we work for a lot of tourism bureaus, and it's like they want their people to read that magazine and they want to be in that shot. And so you do these wide angle, this is what it looks like from the paddler's position. A polarizer is still a key here, and it's going to work great on this lens. Even if you go super wide and zoom it out, if you're vertical, it's not going to be a problem. You're not going to get any uneven polarizing or anything that you may worry about if you're at 14 millimeters on a horizontal axis. So just would throw that one out there, because I've kind of had to remember that now that I actually can put a polarizer on such a wide angle lens. So let's move over to travel a little bit. Everyone out there is taking pictures, and we all have different rates and volumes. Maybe some of us are taking pictures all the time, and other folks just a trip every 6 months, or whatever the case may be. But I'm coming from the school of journalism school 30 years ago, and you get it right in the camera, and then that means you have to do less things in the computer or in the office. Don't get me wrong, we love to work in Photoshop and do all these things. I mean, that is part of the digital process. We all recognize that. But I always feel like, for me personally, if I can do it in the camera, I'm going to do it in the camera. And so here's a great example. This LB color combo, if folks don't know exactly what that is, it's like they sandwich a warming filter with a polarizer. And now think about your next European vacation, or like I'm over there on workshops frequently. You're moving all day long. You shoot through the entire day. You often don't have the luxury of spending 3 days just to get the right sunrise at one particular spot. So if you're out in the middle of the day in this bright blue light, a warming filter is going to be good. And then throw in, well, hey, how about a polarizer? Because I'm also dealing with the same blue harsh light. How about, what's a way to reduce some glare, make the clouds pop a little bit more, add warmth? The LB color combo could be called the put this filter on for all the full day of shooting on a travel shoot, because you're out in this less than ideal lighting. And this is a filter right at the camera level that's going to improve what you're capturing in the camera. It'll mean less time in the computer afterwards as well. This is right out of the camera. This is in Piran. This is Slovenia, just a beautiful country. This is on the coast there. And it's just a classic shot where you have clouds, strong color, but it's not great light, where the color combo here of that LB color combo polarizer, the warming filter combined with the polarizer, just brings it to life. It's just terrific. This one is fun. So another one of my projects, and I highly recommend coming up with personal projects, whether it's a technical thing in photography or it's a subject that you want to cover. There's all ways to tackle this, and I like to do both. And one of the things on a technical level that I've been experimenting with on my travels are long exposure cityscapes, and that's not time-lapse or twilight shooting, but more midday shooting and what happens at really extended shutter speeds. And here's a great example of this. This is also over in Slovenia, Ljubljana. And you have all these people in the streets out there. They're shopping, they're going to markets, things like that. Well, if you don't have any way to slow down your exposure in the middle of the day, you're very limited at how slow you can actually shoot. Even if you go to f/22 and you're at your lowest ISO 150, whatever that is, you're still not going to be able to get to 2 seconds or 5 seconds. You're going to have to use some type of filter. So another filter that is in my bag everywhere I go, it's a 5-stop more slow. It's basically a 5-stop ND filter. So it's blocking 5 stops of light. It is so much fun because it allows you to render people and movement in different ways. This is just a normal shot from a high vantage. If I didn't have this filter, the people are going to be pretty much frozen in place. But add this more slow filter, get a slower shutter speed, and then it changes the entire mood and feeling of the shot. Now, I should point out, I carry a very small, lightweight tripod with me everywhere I go on travel workshops. A lot of folks don't like to bring them. I totally get it. I've had to shop around and get the smallest tripod that I can find that is still going to be stable enough, but it's not that big of an inconvenience, and it allows me to get a shot like this. And it's just changing how I shoot cityscapes and people, where it's opening up a whole new way of rendering, city life. Okay, and then my favorite, this series is pretty entertaining. Maybe you know this, maybe you don't. It's so much fun. You guys got to try this. So bring a really long filter. So let me explain what I'm talking about. Here's the scene. It's a busy square. You're going to see a lot of people. Popular places have a lot of people in the squares in Europe or Asia or wherever you go. So maybe you get up super early and you can find the square with nobody in it. Terrific. That's a great way to go after it. But if you find yourself moving through in the middle of the day and you want that square, but you don't want any people in it, try to shoot a really, really long exposure. Because think about this, all these people are moving. And so if you shoot like 3 or 4 minutes, all that happens is that light burns in and kind of ghosts over all those people, as long as they're not standing still. So here's the before shot, and then let me show you the after, and you can see the filter I used. 2 seconds later after I took this one, I did this one. And voila. All that's happening is just what I mentioned. Now you can see I'm using a 15 stop more slow filter. That is a very strong, dark ND filter. It's so dark such that you need to be focused and set up, because once you put that on your lens, it's going to be too dark for most autofocus systems to work. Maybe a mirrorless could penetrate through that, but a DSLR is just going to be seeing complete darkness. So you have to pre-focus and then get that set. But look what happens over a 5-minute shot. All these people are moving around, and the end result is they basically disappear. Now you can still see some ghosting in there of a few folks that I would have to take out in Photoshop or do something. Honestly, the really challenge anymore with this technique, it used to work great, but now, you know, we all like to take selfies, show folks on social where we are, what we're doing. But then there's a new breed of selfie shooter out there. I see this everywhere, and it's the slow-mo selfie shooter. I mean, do you see this triangle sign in this photo? Look just to the right of that. You will see one person that's still pretty visible. Think about this. That's a 5-minute shot. That person's still there. I'm convinced they're doing the 4-minute selfie where I'm not sure what they're altering, or maybe it's just how they look, but man, when you get the slow-mo selfie shooter, this technique doesn't work, because they just sit there for 3 minutes in your shot. You're like, oh, what am I going to do? That one's going to be one for Photoshop. Anyway, it's fun though. Give it a shot. You'll be amazed at what it does.
That's funny. And you mentioned shopping out that tripod. Do you want to share what tripod it is?
Yeah, you know, I love Really Right Stuff equipment. They have a TVC1. It's the smallest little tripod they use. It's all carbon fiber. It's about maybe just over a foot, a little bit longer than a foot. I don't know the exact weight, but it's very stable. And yet it's lightweight and compact, and I carry that everywhere I go. There's a fine line between getting a super light tripod that isn't stable enough and getting one that's really good, that's also going to be stable and work. And that's the one I use. It's a TVC1. It's the smallest Really Right Stuff tripod that market. Okay, so, and then the last few things I wanted to flip over here is go a completely different direction. And for those folks that are portrait people, talk just a little bit about filters and separation and dimension. I'm guessing that that's one that maybe not a lot of us think about, but another part of our work we shoot portraits for magazines. It's just that's a lot of the work that we get, or we'll do local work for, you know, a business or something like that. So we're shooting portraits all the time. Well, here's one that you may or may not know. You have sync speeds with flash units, which is basically how fast a shutter speed you can use and have the flash still work right. I'll make this as simple as I can. But when you shoot at faster speeds, the flash will be clipped, or the power will be greatly reduced because of the technology that it needs. Well, one way to get around this that we use on a few of our strobe units here is we will use a ND filter. The 5-stop, once again, generally does it. And what that does is, rather than having to shoot at, say, 1/4000th of a second, I can shoot at 1/250th of a second, or even slower. And once I'm in those slower shutter speeds, then my flash system's going to work just fine. Now, you may be asking, well, why in the world would we be shooting so fast, you know, for a portrait? And a lot of it comes down to the second line there. We love to shoot prime fast glass, 1.4, 1.8, 2.8. That shallow depth of field and the bokeh that you get in behind it is just key for a portrait and for so much photography. So if I'm trying to create a shot of a model that is going to pop off the background, I need to do two things. I need to underexpose the background ambient light, so it'll be a little bit darker than my flash, which is going to illuminate the model at the right level, so they'll be brighter, so light advances, dark recedes. So we're tying into this whole idea of creating separation and dimension. But let's not forget, if I want to shoot at 1:4, there's also dimension created by planes of focus. So on the image here of this woman, you're going into her, she's close, front, center, and lit, but you're also feeling that she's coming off that background by way of where it's sharp in the frame and where it's blurry. Now, tying that back to filters, I need to be shooting with a strobe. These are giant lights. This is a 6-foot octabank that we're using to light this portrait. But if I want to shoot at 1:4 or 1:8 or 2:8 or something like that, I'm going to need a filter on in the middle of the day in order to get to that slower speed. Now, some newer flash units and smaller units have some capabilities to shoot in a high-speed sync mode like a speed light does. And that's nice, but a lot of bigger lights don't work that well or don't have that ability, and so we're using this filter all the time. And I think this is probably going to be the last image in the frame, and this was just like a week ago or so. We had an assignment it was on a specific style of lighting and portrait. It was for one of the photo magazines, and this guy I've shot with forever. And a lot of the stuff that I seem to want to get into, I'm not sure if it's on purpose or how this ever happens, but it always seems like we're spraying water on somebody or throwing dirt on them or blowing smoke at them. And so let's go back to that Hilux filter on the front of the lens. This is holy powder. Maybe you've seen that big ceremony they have in India where they run around the streets, they throw this colored powder all over themselves. I mean, that's like on my bucket list. I really want to go there. It's going to destroy a camera, but it's going to be worth it. It would be so much fun. But the whole idea was we're in these COVID times right now, and we wanted to come up with something that was light, fun, airy, and was happy and not so sullen as it seems things are in a lot of areas. So that was the idea we came up with, and we knew we were going to be throwing. There's an assistant right behind this guy with handfuls of this powder, pitching it right at his back. We have the Hilux is on the front of the lens. Otherwise, I'm basically the same color as this powder because it's not stopping at him. It's coming right over onto me in the camera. So you got to protect stuff. And the other part of this for the portrait and flash people out there, the way that we're freezing this powder, it's not by way of shutter speed. If you see the shutter speed, it's only at 1/250th of a second. That's not that fast. What's freezing the powder is the flash duration itself. The flash is the only thing that's lighting this picture. So it's flash duration and not shutter speed that's going to freeze this. And the flash duration for a shot like this, it's well into the thousands, plenty fast enough to freeze this scene. And I just love this guy just showed up wearing the shirt that was kind of like blessed and just like, let's like, yeah, I'm happy to be alive today. And so we ran with it, and we all walked into the house afterwards, just literally like caked in all this powder, but it was a fun shoot. So that I think is the cross section of some pictures for you guys there today.
We have a couple of questions I've been holding on to. If you guys have more questions, put them in the Q&A window and we'll get them addressed. Someone asked, where would you use an ND, 2G, or 3G HS filter?
When you're talking hard edge, if you live near an ocean or have a really defined horizon line, you're going to use hard edge versus the soft edge grad NDs. We have those living in the mountains in Colorado. We're almost always using soft edge here locally, but certainly anytime we're going anywhere that we're going to be on the water, we're going to bring the hard edge because it's so easy. And actually a 2-stop is pretty good. You may need a 3-stop depending on the situation, especially if you have a clean sun that's just coming up right on the horizon. You can line up that hard edge perfectly, and that's going to really help improve that exposure and just compress the highlights and hold on to the shadows.
And then someone asked, and I think you covered this a little bit, do you use the Hilux with other filters or just by itself? And I think technically speaking, most filters, if they're not the thin kind, have a treading on the front so that you can put filters in a row.
That's an excellent question. I don't stack filters as much as I can avoid it. Now, I say that, and I do use this combination of a polarizer and a grad filter a lot. And you know, that just works so well for those landscapes. But for instance, I probably wouldn't screw on a polarizer on a Hilux, only because the polarizer will then be the protective filter instead of the Hilux. You do run into some vignetting issues, depending if you're shooting really wide and you screw in one filter and then you stack another on there, you're extending the lens barrel in essence, so you may see that. But I avoid stacking anything on a Hilux. Generally, I will take it off and put on the other filter, and just to keep it clean, and it's probably going to serve the purpose of protecting the lens, which the Hilux would be doing.
Right. And then when using a 10-stop or higher ND filter, does one need to block the viewfinder from seeping in light?
Yeah. Oh boy, sharp people out there. That's a great point, and it's something that I should have pointed out. You get this really interesting purple fringe when you do these really long shots, and you're going to yourself, what in the heck is going on? It's light leakage coming in through the viewfinder. So to answer that question, yes. Either if some viewfinders have a little shutter window, I put little pieces of black gaffer tape. It lives in my office. Every lens I own has black gaffer tape on the hoods, because stuff like, hey, I don't have something to block my viewfinder, I'm going to peel off this little piece of gaffer tape and use it for that. So another little tip is, every one of these lens hoods on all the glass that we have here in the office has little pieces of gaffer tape on it, because it'll help with little issues like that. But really good point. You got to block that viewfinder for that long exposure.
And that tripod, can you take that on airplanes as a carry-on?
I don't see why you couldn't. I carry all my tripods in my luggage. I just throw them in my gear. I've never brought one on, but I've certainly seen bigger tripods wind up on airplane. It's certainly compact enough. Now, if there was some strange regulation related to, you know, some kind of thread or something like that, but I see a lot of tripods coming on and off airplanes. But personally, I always put them in my luggage. I've never worried about that. I haven't lost, let's say I've had some suitcases delayed a couple times, but that would be the risk there. But I don't think it would be a problem taking it on a plane.
And then would white gaffer tape work as well as black gaffer tape?
It would work probably just as well. There might be a little more light that could possibly get through there. I don't use white gaffer tape. We pretty much are using black, but I would think it would probably be just fine. I would imagine it would block enough.
Okay. And then shooting flowers and plants in the past using ND filters, I have run into problems with movement showing up in the image. Are you just picking really still times, or?
Yeah, that's, yes. If you, I can relate, the Columbine are out in Colorado right now, and they are so tall that you just breathe hard and they start to float around. So you just wait it out. Now you can also do some tricks with focus stacking at faster shutter speeds and shallower depths of field, so that you can shoot that same flower at a really fast speed, but still stack all this depths of field. So there's tricks to get around flower movement if you're trying to get a bunch of critical focus on the shot. But so much for us. The one thing that we learned a couple weeks ago in Colorado is, if you are out shooting at like 5:30 to about 7, you are good to go. But from like 7:30 until 8:30 at night, there's always some kind of breeze. Even on a perfectly still, calm day, these mountain valleys, there's too much going on with airflow between high and lows in the valleys. So it's a challenge.
And then do you use in-camera noise reduction in your very long exposures?
Yeah, absolutely. If it's 30 seconds or longer, I'll probably turn it on. I'm not too worried about 10 seconds, 15 seconds. But if it's going to be a really longer shot, then I will turn on long exposure noise reduction. And what that'll do is it doubles the amount of processing time. So a 1-minute photo, you shoot for a minute, and then you have to wait a full minute before the camera can actually do what it's doing in the processing part of things. But my experience has been that is super helpful and really helps eliminate a lot of that front end noise, especially on really long shots. I would turn it on for longer exposures.
And do you need to block the viewfinder on mirrorless too, or just with the DSLR?
No, that's just DSLRs. Another fantastic question. Yeah, mirrorless is an interesting thing. There's no mirror, so it works differently inside the camera. You don't have to block. Another thing that I should point out is for those folks that are going to try that 5-stop, and not necessarily the 5, but maybe the 10-stop ND filter, because mirrorless cameras have an electronic viewfinder, a lot of them can focus right through that. A DSLR, it just goes dark. So you're in a real-time viewfinder situation, and you're going to have to turn off autofocus once you've established it and put on the filter. So, the systems have pros and cons both ways. We use, if you talking cameras, I mean, we're still shooting DSLRs every day and mirrorless. We bring them both on assignments. We find that we like certain styles for certain types of subject matter and what's going on.
Right. And do you have a maximum ISO for longer exposures?
Boy, that is so funny. We just are finishing up an online class, and one of our assignments was set the highest ISO that your camera can go to and go out at night and take a picture and just see and look at it. Because none of us ever do that. We're like, oh, it goes to 1 million ISO. I mean, who's ever going to shoot there? Right. But it's a great exercise because you're going to learn a little bit about just how great 12,800 looks like on a D5 or a D850. Generally my max I try to top out on is 6,400 ISO, and that's on a full frame D850 or D5. I've shot at 12.8. We've done assignments at 12.8, 12,800 in arenas of skaters and things where you need a lot of speed. And you're in a low light situation, and they are usable and publishable pictures. But remember, each time you notch up on ISO, you're losing acuity, color fidelity, micro contrast. There's little things that you're losing as you increase that signal to noise ratio.
Right. Okay, so I think that's it for questions. We want to thank everyone for joining us tonight, and shameless plug for our next webinar. In August, we have Vinnie Colucci, who's going to talk about the Milky Way, star trails, and the moon. And then in September, we have Colleen Miniuk, and her webinar is titled No More Rules, Human Perception in Compositions. And you can register for those right now, actually, if you go to stingray.com/webinars. And then Tom, I just wanted to thank you so much for your time. I know it's very valuable time, and you guys have a very busy schedule, so we always appreciate when you take an hour out for us.
No, I love to talk photo stuff. It's exciting. It's like, I love to hear the questions. It gets me thinking about other things I want to try.
Right. Well, great. All right. Well, I hope everyone will join us again next month, and have a great weekend out there taking photos with all this new knowledge.
All right.